So welcome to the marking out of the spice jar holder. In this video we'll mark out all the pieces involved, get them scribed up and get them ready for processing. So we're starting off here just by marking the face side and face edge on a number of pieces. Marking the two sides left and right and the foot plate left and right. That will go together to make the sides of the spice jar holder. Again, like all Project Wood videos, I'm using pen here for people to be able to see it a little bit easier. But I recommend that you use a 2H pencil as it's easy to rub out and sand off later on. So we're just marking the depth here onto the side of the foot or base. This timber is 18 millimeters deep. But we just measure straight off the wood to get a very accurate reading. So marking all lines all the way around with tri-square using face side and face edge. Now we're marking halfway across the wood at 50 millimeters, and we'll be marking a 10 in here. We'll be removing half that wood to go into the rear of the base piece. Feel free to pause at any time if you're making this kit along with me. So we'll be removing the front half of this joint, and the rear section will slot down into the base. Again, you can use your own sizes if you like. These are just guidelines. I always encourage people to alter the design and to change the sizes as long as the end product is still good. Scribing all our lines here so that we get nice clean saw cuts. Not pushing down too hard when we're going with the grain. Going across the grain here, you can push down pretty hard. And on the side here, we just be very careful not to allow the piece to slip. So we're just lining that up now to position it on the base. It's going to be going in a central location, and we'll need to remove housing to suit. So there's enough timber in the cutting list to allow you to make this spice rack kind of wide or narrow. That's up to yourself. Attaching the sides to the base is the same no matter how wide you make the spice rack. So we're just squaring those off now and going to measure off the housing joint. It's 50 millimeters long. There's two sides and two kind of base foot plates. So once you mark one, the other one will be pretty easy. Measuring in there 9 millimeters out from the center. It's half the width of the timber, and we'll get our thickness then from the upright piece. Always hard to be accurate here using a pen as the tip is not that sharp. So we'll be removing those pieces. the camera above has a kind of an ultraviolet light on it to help bring out the pen lines, to make them easy to see. So just marking off the waist there. It's always nice to put X's or shade in your waist so you don't make a mistake when you're cutting it out. And again, gentle scribing with the grain, not pushing down too hard here. And then getting an 18mm chisel to scribe across the shoulder. The scribing like this is the great woodwork secret to getting lovely sharp edges on your joints. It'll stop the saw from tearing into the good side of the wood. So that's the basic joint then, to attach the sides to the base. Simple housing joint. So we're just going to put a little bit of design here on the outside corners. A display or chamfer, whatever size you want yourself. Going for a pretty small one here. We want this to be nice and stable on the countertop, especially when you're using it and you're cooking utensils. So I'm only going to take off a little splay for to make it look a little bit better. And yet it will still function very well. Just mark those over the sides for checking our accuracy in cutting. So that's the base piece. You can add extra design features if you like. Just keep well away from the joint area. So we label left and right on our base pieces and our side pieces, as these are going to be mirrors of each other. So that's the right hand side going to slot in there, and our left side. So we're just going to eyeball where we're going to put some shelves. I'm going to put the bottom one at a small angle of maybe 10-15 degrees. You could keep it straight if you like. Just looks better at an angle. And that's the top shelf there. We're going to keep that straight. So we want to mark off some tenons here to allow the shelves to attach into the sides. So we just again mark the thickness of the two sides onto the shelves. We'll bring those all the way around. Speeding things up here by marking both out at the same time. This is where a large tri-square comes in handy. And making sure we keep our face edge out towards us on both pieces there. So you can mark two off at the same time. Again, for accuracy, keep your tri-square only the brass part of the tri-square touching the P or the V, the face side and face edge. This will ensure that your lines match up when they come all the way around. So there's going to be a tenon at each end here and the same on the other shelf. So a lot of repetition, which is good for improving your woodwork in general and speeding up projects. You can use the full length as outlined in the cutting list here for the shelf, or shorten it up if you haven't space in your countertop for it. This one's quite wide. So I'm just marking off 3 centimeter tenons. You can go a little bit wider or a little bit narrower. Ideally divide the width, which is 100, into 3 equal parts. We'll just mark those tenons over the end grain and onto the back side. Again, where possible, always use your face side and face edge until you can't. So at this stage, if you're using a pencil, you'd want to get it sharpened again. Every 2 or 3 pieces of wood, you'll find the pencil get a little bit blunt, and this will not help your accuracy. Pressing gently onto the grain here when we're going with the grain in the scribing process, and across the grain here. You'll note that we keep the flat side of the chisel facing out to the good wood, and the angular side or bevel sides always facing to the waste. You can hold a wooden device also for this procedure of scribing the edges. It would be a lot safer if you're new to woodwork. So we repeat that on both ends of both shelves. It simplifies the project and gives it kind of a consistent, elegant look as well. Just finishing off the top shelf here. There's a lot of knotting in the wood on one end here, so you want to scribe that well. That's both our shelves ready for cutting up. Now on the bottom slanted shelf we're going to attach a strip of wood that has cutouts for 4 or 5 of the spice jars you can see here. So these can be any design. I'm going for kind of hexagonal type design. You can also cut out some curves or just leave it straight edged. But making little cutouts will hold the jars in place better and also look much better presentation wise. So I'm just cutting this piece of timber to suit the length of the shelves. So we need a piece of timber full length, similar to the shelf, minus the 2 joints at the end. So we measure up a spice jar here. These are pretty standard Schwarzkopf spice jars, 45 millimeters wide. So with the cutting list given for the spice rack here and matching up this frontal piece to the shelf, we can divide up our wood 9 millimeters, 45, 945, 945 and so on to give us 5 spice jar holders. You'll see these more close up later on. Again, you can alter these measurements to suit yourself. There's your 9 millimeters, 45, then 9, 45, 9, 45 mil, 9, 45. Just flipping over the tri-square to make it easier. 9, 45, and you should be left with 9 millimeters on the end. So we take our marking gauge and set it to half the depth of the wood. We're going to make our little spice jar grooves half the depth of this support piece. So we'll just run that along, keeping our little finger underneath the stem here to help us out. Marking gauges are not the easiest tool in the world to use. And we push away from the body and we'll mark out that line with a pencil then. Trying to keep the pencil in the groove. Not always easy either, just take your time with it. So we've come down there maybe 1.5 centimeters, not even halfway. Now we want to put some angles on the side of these spice jar holders. So you can go with 60 degrees or 45 degrees here. I'm going with 45 degrees, so it's actually kind of an octagonal base. And just squaring it off the bottom of the timber, marking out these little pieces. We will remove them later on and the spice jars will sit down nicely into those. So we have 5 of those to mark right across the face. We'll want to mark these over the top and around the back as well. As for the sawing out process, we're going to need to be able to reverse that wood in the vise with all the angles that need cutting. So just mark those over the end of the wood. These lines are very important. Sawing these straight will greatly add to the stability of the jars in the spice jar holder, and also help to make it look good. We just mark our waste here with some X's. And just repeat those angles on the back, the marking gauge on the back, trying to mirror exactly what's on the front. So this is where a good sharp pencil and just taking your time will help greatly. So we've got some knots down the back of this piece of timber, so I'm just pulling it towards me this time to try and defeat those. And see the way it's catching there in the wood. I'll try it from this end. Slightly better. Just make sure you're running the marking gauge off at the top of the wood on both marking the front and the back so that they have the same depth. So we'll take our 45-degree set square here again and repeat the process from the front, marking out the octagonal kind of shapes. Again, these can be circular, you can leave them out altogether. There's great scope for your own design here, and to be able to change things up in all the project wood kits. Again, we mark out our waist here on the back. Measure twice, cut once. All these will have to be scribed as well very carefully to get a nice clean finish. But that's the 5 holders for the spice jars on the bottom. And this panel will just be screwed and glued onto our shelf. So we'll just mark the width of it, divide it into a couple of equal spaces, maybe 3 equal spaces even, and we'll put 2 or 3 screws into that later on. You could finger joint it onto the shelf if you want to do an extra little bit of woodwork there. But there's not going to be a whole lot of weight or pressure on this piece of wood, so screw or glue on its own would be okay in this occasion. So just marking the center points of the holes. Going for 3 screws here, so I've actually divided the width there into 4 equal parts. Try to always mark the center position of any sort of hole that's going to be drilled with crosshairs, and then I always know that drilling is needed there. You'll come up with your own routines and your own methods. So that will be screwed on there later on. Now perhaps the most complicated part of the project, fitting the shelves onto the sides. So you can make it easy or difficult. So I've put both in here. The bottom shelf I'm going to put in at a slant, about 20 mil up here on the front from the shoulder of the joint. That gives us about a 10 or 15 degree angle. So just marking in the position of the tenon there. So you'll need to remove a rectangular piece the exact same size as the rectangle on the end of the tenon joint. So you can see it there marked at an angle, exact same size as the end of the tenon. Now you could also go straight in here, keep it parallel with the bottom of the wood, but we're going to do that with the top shelf. And mixing them up can actually look a little bit better. If you have a lot of time in your hand, you can make both shelves at an angle and also put holders on the front of both for the spice jars. So just clarifying all my lines here and making them nice and straight. Mark out our waist, so we'll be removing that and our shelf tenons will slot in there. So I'm just going to extend the lines now so that I can bring those around to the other side and have a perfect match on the other side. Later on we're going to be chiseling in from both sides, so they have to be perfectly aligned. So taking your time here is a must. So I'll drop the bottom corner around the end grain. That way I know everything will be in alignment. Just mark the tenon again around on the other side, making sure it's at the same angle. Again, this is quite complicated and you can pause it at any stage if you're building this, and again rewind, etc. if you need to stay up with the joint. There's our front and back mirroring each other. So that's our left side. You have to be careful that you don't mark exactly the same on the right hand side, because they're on left and right sides, they're just going to be mirrors of each other, which we'll see now in a moment. So carefully labeling that as left side. Not going to mix it up with the other side. So marking the position for shelf number 2. Again, you could go at an angle parallel to the shelf below. I like the idea of having one level shelf to put the jars into as I'm cooking. So just mark the width of that wood, mark it all the way around, and mark our tenon out as we did on the bottom shelf. So this one is much easier, everything being nice and straight, working off your face side and face edge. So marking the tenons to suit from the top shelf, getting the correct width. We'll mark this on the front and the back and chisel through from both sides. You can scribe as you go, or you can scribe all the joints at the end. I don't really have a preference. Some projects just leave it all till the end. With slightly more complicated project like this, I tend to scribe as I go so I know I'm finished each joint completely. So that's our two joints marked out. And repeat all that marking out for the other side. So again, to speed things up, we can line up both pieces and use the one we have marked already to help us out with the other side. So the top shelf's not going to be a problem, it's just going to be carried straight across. But for this bottom shelf, we need to get the angles to match. So you can see there how one is a mirror of the other. So again, same process for marking out that joint and carry that over to the back of the piece of wood as well. And marking the top shelf the same as the first piece. The making of this and other projects are available in full to Patreon members only, certainly for the first year of the project. And also you'll see on the YouTube channel, on YouTube, there are 5 to 10 minute kind of sped up versions of the making. So you can have a quick look through those, and please like and share and comment. It helps me to grow the channel and I appreciate it. It also whets your appetite for the different projects. So just checking that everything is in alignment here. So for the top shelf, I'm going to put a couple of dowels. You can see the dowel rods there towards the right of the picture. A couple of dowels going from the front and the back, side to side. So any spice jars that you put up on the top shelf are well supported and won't roll off. So I've drawn a line in the centre. I've gone out about 23 millimeters each side of that line. Depends on the size of the jars you use here, but you want to keep the dowels at least far enough apart that you can actually slot the jars in easily. So marking the position here, the dowels are 6 millimeter diameter. So we have enough space between the two lines for the width of the jar, and then we'll go out an extra 3 to 4 millimeters to mark the position of the center of the hole, where we will drill a pilot hole and then drill our 6 millimeter hole for the dowel. We have to allow for the radius of the dowel here, or we won't fit our jars in. So it's approximately 22 millimeters in from each side there for the center of the hole, if your wood is 100 millimeters wide. Now, roughly locating the position here of a hole for a dowel at the back to stop our spice jars from sliding off on the angle shelf. So you can do this by eye. I've gone up there approximately 25 millimeters, I think, from the top of the angle. Yep, 25, and we'll be coming in about 1 centimeter there from the back. So again, we have our crosshair there to mark the position of the hole. Now our big job here is to get these to line up absolutely perfectly with the other side. So we want to just use a pilot hole bit, 1 to 2 millimeters wide. Line up our two sides on top of each other and drill through from one side to the other, and then they will match up perfectly. So I have a 1.5 millimeter bit here. So we line them up as a mirror, as we marked them out. Flip them together with the crosshairs on the outside, so we'll pop that up, square off the edges, and we'll drill through the top piece, making a mark down into the bottom piece, but not going all the way through to save our desktop. I always have a replaceable desktop on top of my bench, so normally I don't be too obsessed whether I drill into it or not. But for normal woodworking, it's good practice not to go drilling down into your desk. So we're just drilling down here about 20 millimeters through the first piece, and you'll feel it popping into the piece below. And when we remove them, you'll be able to drill all the way through. So I've lined them up again just to test that they are perfectly aligned. So as I drill through the top piece, I can feel it perfectly lining up with the holes below. We have 3 of those to do. So later on then we'll drill 6mm holes to accommodate those dowel pieces. So double checking again, just to make sure everything lines up. And we'll put a nice chamfer mark here on the top front corner of our 2 sides as well. The size of that up to yourself. You can match the chamfer that you have on the base if you wish, or make it a little bit longer as it's a bigger piece of timber. And we'll mark that on the left and the right sides. Cut those off as well later on. And that's pretty much everything marked out and ready for processing.